Welcome to Social Civics, the channel where we break down the ideas, systems, and institutions that shape our civic life. Today, we're going to talk about a term you've probably heard thrown around, especially when things get heated politically: martial law. It sounds really serious, and well, it is. But what does it actually mean? I think for a lot of us, we never got a really clear definition. So that's exactly what we're going to do today. See, at its core, martial law isn't just about seeing soldiers on the streets. It's a huge shift in who's actually holding the power. So let's get into what that really looks like. All right, first things first, what even is martial law? Before we dive into all the history and the big what-if scenarios, we need to start with a solid, simple definition. Okay, the most important word on this slide is replacement. This is not a situation where the military is just helping out civilian leaders. No, this is about the military literally taking over the government's job. All three branches, the executive, the legislative, and the judicial, could fall under military control. It is an absolutely extreme measure, and it's meant only for the most extreme emergencies. Now, this is where a lot of people get mixed up, so let's clear it up. You know when you hear about a state of emergency, like for a massive hurricane or something? In that case, the civilian government gets some extra powers, but the key is, civilian leaders are still in charge. Under martial law, that civilian authority is pushed completely to the side. The military is in direct control. It is a world of difference. So that's the big picture definition. But what would it actually feel like to live through? You know, how does this massive switch from civilian to military rule affect an ordinary person's day-to-day life? This right here, this really shows you the impact. Your freedom to just go where you want could be shut down by military curfews and checkpoints. And one of the biggest changes is the potential suspension of habeas corpus. Now, that's a legal term, but it basically means it's your right not to be locked up forever without being charged with a crime. Under martial law, that protection could just vanish. And in the most extreme cases, regular courts get replaced by military tribunals. Okay, this all sounds pretty total, right? Which brings up a really important question. In a democracy that's built on the idea of individual rights, are there any checks on this kind of power? This is a huge fear for a lot of people. When the military takes over, does the US Constitution just get put on a shelf until the crisis is all over? Well, the good news is, according to the Supreme Court, the answer is a clear no. The Constitution is still the law of the land. There was a huge case way back in 1866 called Ex parte Milligan, and it set a really important rule. As long as the regular civilian courts are open for business, you can't put a civilian on trial in a military court, so martial law does not create a constitution-free zone. And it actually goes even deeper than that. Under both US law and international law, there are certain rights that can never be taken away. They're sometimes called non-derogatable rights, which is just a fancy legal way of saying they're untouchable. We're talking about the big ones, like the right to life and freedom from torture. These are seen as the absolute foundation of human rights, and they're protected no matter what's going on. So we've got the theory, we've got the legal limits, but how has martial law actually been used in American history? Let's take this idea and ground it in some real-world examples. Now, this number right here might surprise you: 68. While a federal declaration of martial law is incredibly rare, it's been declared at the state and local level almost 70 times. It was often governors who did it, usually in response to major labor strikes or periods of serious unrest. This timeline shows some of the biggest examples. Of course, it was used during the Civil War to keep order. Then, during the Reconstruction era, the US Army actually governed the southern states that had seceded. And most people don't know this, but after the attack on Pearl Harbor, the entire territory of Hawaii was put under martial law for almost 3 years. In this image, wow, it gives us such a powerful look into that Reconstruction era. What you're seeing here is an Army officer from what was called the Freedmen's Bureau, and he's protecting newly freed African Americans from white mobs. It's a really important reminder that military governance isn't always about suppression. In this specific case, it was actually used to enforce federal law and protect civil rights when the local civilian authorities wouldn't. Okay, so we've looked at the past, but how do all these historical examples and court cases shape the conversation around martial law today? Let's talk about how it works in practice. This is a really, really important distinction to make. You might hear people talk about the Insurrection Act, especially when presidents think about using troops inside the country. Here's the difference. The Insurrection Act lets the military assist civilian police. Under martial law, they replace them. It all comes down to that one critical question: who is in charge? And now for what might be the most surprising, and for a lot of legal experts, the most worrying fact of all. There is no federal law that actually defines martial law. The Constitution doesn't even mention it by name. And what that means is its exact powers and its limits have never been clearly written down. They're just left open to debate, which is why you'll often hear it described as being dangerously unclear. When it's all said and done, talking about martial law forces us to face one of the oldest and toughest balancing acts in any democracy. I think this quote from Supreme Court Justice Hugo Black just hits the nail on the head. He wrote this for the case that officially ended martial law in Hawaii. Our entire system, with its checks and balances and its focus on individual rights, is designed to be the complete opposite of rule by a single military commander. So let's sum it all up. What's the bottom line? Martial law is basically the government's ultimate emergency button. It represents a fundamental trade. You're temporarily giving up the freedoms you normally have in exchange for the promise of order and security. By its very nature, it is the absolute last resort. And that leaves us with the big question that never really goes away. In a true moment of national crisis, how much liberty are we willing to trade for security? And maybe just as important, who gets to decide where that line is drawn? There's no easy answer, and it's a question every generation really has to think about. If you're interested in learning more about the ideas and institutions that shape our civic life, consider subscribing to Social Civics. This channel exists to help all of us better understand the systems we live under. Thanks so much for watching.